Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Cade, and today we have a brand new group discussion episode. And for today, I am joined by returning guests Felicity, Hunter, and Cassidy. Felicity, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Hunter, welcome back.
Hey, good to be back.
And Cassidy, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, for today's episode, we are going to be talking about the Twilight Saga. Now, some of you might be wondering, why are we talking about Twilight? Well, I promised our guests that they could decide which topic we'd be discussing today, so here we are. So, to start this off, Felicity, Hunter, and Cassidy, the first thing I wanted to ask you guys about is what's your relationship with the Twilight Saga?
I think I remember the first time I heard about Twilight was like in fifth grade, and I think that's when the first movie came out, roughly. I was determined to read the books, and then I realized I was in fifth grade and was not gonna read those books. And so I just watched all the movies and was obsessed with them. And then I found out that I was just simply, I think, obsessed with like vampire stuff as a young child, which I don't know what that says about me, but
Okay, so my best friend's sister had the book with her, and I was like, what is that? And she explained it in a way where I was like, that sounds really weird, vampires and werewolves. And so years went by, and then I ended up binging the movies in high school. I watched them all night long. I stayed up all night. I remember being really tired, I can't stop talking about this to everyone around me. So after that, I became obsessed, and then I kind of forgot about them for a long time until now when we're talking about it. So this is pretty cool.
Well, I got into it because I have an older sister. She's 4 years older than me, and she was really into it. And her and my mom were reading the books before the movies were coming out. So, because of them, I got super into it.
Well, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. I'm not a fan of Twilight.
No problem.
I'm shocked, Kate.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into the topic of discussion for today. So, looking back at the Twilight Saga, is it worth watching? Is there entertainment value in these movies? Do you think that they're overhated? Do you think maybe there's a certain perspective that you can watch these movies from? Because one argument that I've heard a lot is if you watch these movies with a certain intent, that intention being, laughing your ass off at it for how certain things are, I've heard that it can work that way as a sort of guilty pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. It could, because some scenes are just so comedic gold. The timing of things. I know there's a lot of satire videos now. There's even like a satire like movie that came out after this because some of the lines are ridiculous. Some of the things that happen that would literally never happen. And also they're just so fake. So sometimes it's just like a good laugh, but it's also the romance of it all. Like you just have to follow no matter how stupid everything sounds and is and looks. I can't stop watching.
And it may sound silly, but sometimes I find the comparison of Twilight to Harry Potter fans. You're just so encapsulated in the world, as young teenagers and or younger. In the past, I was like, romance. And then now, as an adult who sees bad patterns in relationships, now it's just kind of funny to watch.
Yeah, going off Felicity with like the world building, when you're watching it, you kind of just have to accept that this is the world, these are the characters, and not read into it too much and just accept what it is. So yeah, I look at it now, it's comical. And then even watching interviews of the actors talking about Twilight, they feel a certain type of way about the franchise. So yeah, I definitely don't go into it watching it like, oh, this is a super serious, I don't know, Oscar-worthy film, but I take it for what it is, and it's a fun ride if you do it like that.
Yeah, and the thing that I remember most about Twilight, back when it was being released each year from 2008 to 2012, my biggest memory is just how big it was. It was everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing it. The books were everywhere, but also the other kids I went to school with had Twilight t-shirts, they had backpacks, there were Twilight binders. Then you had all the other students, specifically the girls, arguing about who was going to marry Robert Pattinson in the future, who was going to marry Taylor Lautner. There was even the fire and ice candies based off Edward and Jacob, too. It was just everywhere.
Wait, did you say fire and ice candies based off them?
Yep.
What? Where was I?
I honestly forgot about that until you just said that.
Wow.
And I never had a Twilight t-shirt until a few years ago. Because they sell them at Target now. And
She's a real fan now.
now I am. It's in my dresser.
Well, but you know what? Here's a funny thing about these movies. So these were all just panned by the critics, yet they made $3.3 billion worldwide. Now, I know that I'm a dumbass, okay? I get that. But while I kind of do understand why they were so popular, I don't get why so many people loved these movies so much. I don't get why so many people thought, these are great characters. These are great narratives. This is a great interpretation of vampires. For you personally, what exactly was it that made these movies so popular?
The love for yearning. It was like a slow burn at first, in the first movie, kind of, and nothing really happens. Everyone was just, oh, we really want to see this romance blossom. Everyone loves drama, love triangle. Is she is she gonna become a vampire? Is she not gonna become a vampire?
I have a feeling you might not like it because the narrator, we're seeing it through Bella's eyes. So essentially, we're seeing it as this innocent girl who is like, I don't know anything and I just want to fall in love with a vampire. And that is probably not appealing to the general public unless you're a 12 to like 18-year-old girl or whoever. It just might not be as appealing, so you can't relate to it. And so I think all these people were on the edge of their seat because I need to know immediately because they have a crush on him. Like, I need to know like what Bella's thinking, or I need to know what they're doing just because they related to her kind of awkwardness in this weird human to now new vampire world that we don't really know how to navigate. So I think it's all about just her navigating and us being right there with her the whole time. Yeah, like a slow burn, specifically towards like Bella's character.
Yeah, it was also kind of the era and the time that all of these movies came out in. But, a lot of teenage girls are watching this franchise when it came out. And it's kind of that feeling of your first love is always so intense and like you get so wrapped up in it, especially as a teenager in middle school or high school. A lot of teens could relate to Bella as a character. And then on top of like the added fantasy and mystery of werewolves and vampires. And yeah, so I don't know. It was also like, I don't know if the movies would hit as hard right now if they came out today.
Well, in talking about the first movie specifically, the very first Twilight film from 2008, when it comes to Bella as a character, so the author of the book, Stephanie Meyer, she claims that she wrote Bella as neutral so that female readers could kind of project themselves through her. That may have been what the movies were trying to do, but for me personally, I think this is part of what makes Bella a boring character to follow because she almost has no personality or any real genuine emotions throughout this movie and almost throughout the entirety of the franchise. The main thing I can sum up about her character is that she loves Edward. Aside from that, I can't tell you anything about this girl. I mean, I can't tell you what her hobbies are. I can't tell you what she aspires to be, what she wants to accomplish in life, other than being with Edward and eventually becoming a vampire. For me, it's just not a fun character to follow. We don't spend enough time learning about who she is for me to get attached to her, if that makes sense.
I'm not mad at what you said, Cade. In fact, I agree with you.
Really?
Yeah, I think I mean now I agree with you, but I think her character in the beginning, the first two, was so painful. I agree, did not feel like a developed character. She kind of just hesitated her way through her sentences and everything was, I don't know, but I love Edward and that's it. So yeah, I think they 100% could have made her an independent persona, but they chose to mesh it into whatever she wants to do with him. So yeah, I do agree with you with that.
I agree. She's not like a fleshed out character. And then also, having been younger than her and watching it, you look up to people who are older than you. And also, just she was very desired in the movies. Everybody wanted her, even though she was so friggin' boring.
Well, I do want to say this. You know what's one of the most hilarious things about this movie?
Mm.
What I find hilarious is how everyone at school reacts to Bella when she first arrives. Everyone just kind of instantly welcomes her into their inner circle and act like she's one of the coolest people that they've ever met. I mean, yeah, because that's exactly how high school works, right?
Right. Every time somebody new came to my school, it was just, I felt so bad because if you're even slightly just not the cool kids, you were not picked apart, but you were like asked 20 questions about yourself. And then if you were deemed anywhere near the cool people, it was just, oh, now this person's totally sought after. And I feel like Bella was just a normal person. So it just didn't feel realistic, like you're saying.
Maybe they're just really nice. They're all just really nice kids.
Well, apart from Bella, we do need to talk about Edward.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest with you guys again. I don't think Edward's a very interesting character. Just like what I said with Bella, I don't think he has much of a personality either. His main personality trait, just like with Bella, is that he's in love with Bella. That's the most that I can tell you about this guy. Other than that, he's mainly just whatever the plots demand him to be. He's romantic when he needs to be romantic. He protects Bella when he needs to protect Bella. And he explains vampire mythology to us when we need to learn about it and when it's convenient. he's just not really that interesting of a character.
No, I agree. That's probably why it's just so easy to follow because you don't really have to think about it. He just lays it out right in front of you. This is what I have to offer everyone, and it's not much, but it's good enough, I guess. So we love
Yeah.
it.
I have seen some scenes that weren't added into the movie. Specifically, there's this one scene in Breaking Dawn that wasn't added to the movie. But if they were to add that scene, it shows so much character development between the two of them, and it kind of deems them as real people that can, I don't know, have fun with each other. And so yeah, I wish that there was more of that in the movies, but I also think that they're huge books, and I think that in the movies they're just trying to add what they need to progress the storyline because there's so much to go through.
But you know what's hilarious, Hunter?
Hmm.
Out of all the ways that Bella could have found out that Edward is a vampire, she Googles it.
Yep, she's using her
What it's there
resources.
for.
And you know what? If it was made today, she would have asked ChatGPT.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is my boyfriend a vampire?
Well, you know what? Here's the big thing that I wanted to talk about with the three of you. Maybe you can help me understand this. Why exactly do vampires sparkle in this universe? And I know that this is supposed to be its own mythology, but just what's the point? And that leads me into another issue that I have with this franchise. By making vampires sparkle in sunlight, you take away their main weakness. Because throughout the rest of the franchise, we don't see them affected by any other known weaknesses for vampires. They're not affected by silver, they're not affected by garlic, we don't see them get affected by holy water, crosses, wooden stakes to the heart. Nothing. And for me, when you take away so many risks, then it makes the story less exciting because I prefer stories, especially vampire stories, when there's more at risk for the characters. Here's an example. In True Blood, you can kill vampires in so many different ways, and that's part of what made the show interesting. Same thing goes for movies like The Lost Boys. Vampires have multiple weaknesses in that. But in this, you take away all their known weaknesses, and for me, it just takes away the excitement.
No, it's a good point to think about, honestly.
Maybe since Stephanie Meyer is religious and Edward's character is supposed to have religious morals and whatnot, that maybe the cross and the holy water and all those things, she didn't want those to be ways to kill them because of wanting to prove that he does have a soul, because he has the capability to love, and so do the rest of them. Maybe that's sort of why that part isn't there. But in Garlic and the sunlight, I'm not sure. I think trying to paint them in an alluring, desirable, but also to point out a predator. Most predators have a way of viewing that they are that. If you saw them in the sunlight, you would know that they were different.
Well, I think they're supposed to be these beautiful and mythical creatures almost. I think they say they're beautiful. You know, like they're monsters, and Jacob always like says, I'm a monster, but then in contrast, they are beautiful. They shine like diamonds.
They're evolutionary vampires. They have evolved. I can guarantee everyone has their own opinions, but I really don't think they say it in why their skin glows. Maybe it's, yeah, they're just majestic vampires that have evolved into their own being, specifically for this movie.
Well, and let's talk about something else. So, regarding the plot of this movie, what is up with how this first movie is structured? Because this movie is about 2 hours long, and that's not a bad runtime. But the real conflict of the story doesn't come into play until an hour and 20 minutes into the runtime when we meet the other vampires in the movie. The third act is when we really start to get more of an actual plot, because that's when James and the rest of his coven become a real problem for the characters, specifically James. But most of the movie is Bella and Edward getting to know each other and her learning more about how vampires exist and whatnot. And until we get to the third act, it's mainly just them hanging out, not really trying to accomplish anything. And that causes the film to feel more like a drag rather than a slow burn.
Yeah, I think there has to be like a lot of world building when you're making a movie that has like a very specific world that's very different from ours. So I think it kind of had to be that way. You have to know a lot before we get it like deep into it, you know?
Well, you can teach us a bunch of stuff while still having them trying to accomplish something, though.
Yeah, but what is there to accomplish if she doesn't meet Edward yet?
We could introduce the vampires earlier on. That's a possibility.
I guess that's true. You got me there.
But we had to earn trust first with Edward because, per se, going to kill her. So it's not like he's gonna entice her to meet the whole clan when, all right, I might not kill you now. Like, are we ready to meet? So they have to build a human relationship and then they have to build their immortal side of the relationship of trust at a very young age. So I feel like it's all just kind of odd, the scenario. So they kind of have to build it a little bit.
Yeah, speaking of that, when you look at other vampire shows or movies, usually it's the guy that's vampire most of the time. He's usually distant, like how Edward was, trying to keep her away, but he was just cold, but then also protective, which is kind of the trope. But in other shows and movies, there's like a danger associated with him most of the time. Yeah, sure, she almost gets hit by a van and he saves her, but that's once again, he was not the cause of that problem. In other shows and movies, he's the cause, or he tries to scare her into staying away because he's harmful. And in this, it feels probably slower because it's no danger to any of them at the beginning. You're seeing the other clan doing stuff, but there's nothing really, like you said, there's nothing going on there. It's just if there was something happening where there was a danger involved, or oh, is this guy good or bad? The whole time he's a good guy. You never question that. You're just like, oh, he's just kind of rude.
Well, and speaking of the side characters in this movie, I gotta tell you, I don't think that this film does a very good job with many of the side characters because we have Bella's dad, Charlie, who he's probably the best side character in the franchise, in my opinion. But then there's also Bella's friends, Jessica, Angela, Mike, and Eric. And the thing is, her friends don't really play much of a role in this movie, if you really think about it, or the rest of the movies. Their whole thing in this movie is just hanging out, chatting about who's taking who to prom. And same thing goes for the villains in this movie, James, Laurent, and Victoria. I mean, James is obviously the main villain of the film, but thing is, he's not really a very interesting or memorable villain. He's kind of just generic evil vampire who wants to kill Bella. Other than that, there's nothing really about him character-wise. And I think that when he dies, it makes Victoria's motivation in hunting down Bella out of revenge feel a little less effective.
I always complained about how the friends are not fleshed out or central to the story at all. I always hate that in a movie when they're just there to move the main character's plot along. I much prefer when side characters have a deeper involvement in the story or you have more of a affinity for them. And same with the villain. The first movie was very not high stakes. All of the decisions that got them there were not the right decisions anyway. And I agree with you that James is just not a really fleshed out villain. Throughout the other movies, Victoria was more complex or interesting, but even then, I mean, she lacked something most of the time.
I'm pretty sure when I was watching it back, Victoria, they changed up her character.
They recast her in the third movie. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked her the most in the third movie, I think. But she stood out to me in the first two, but her personality, I think, really took over the presence in the third one. Out of all the characters, yes, I agree that all the other characters are really undeveloped. Even Charlie, I think, he was kind of just, oh, Bella, what have you gotten yourself into? And they didn't really do much for him in that sense.
I will say this though, Cassidy. I think that of all the side characters, he's probably the most involved because you see him investigating the murders committed by the vampires. So he's at least involved with the narrative in that sense. But her friends, Jessica and Angela, they're just there to have fun with Bella and just chat and hang out and not really do anything.
I think they were there to just normalize her and make her a high school girl because they just represented a form of like a jealousy, a jealous friend, and then like a supportive friend. And she's already kind of an odd character, so they kind of needed something to be like, Bella, no, you are normal. You're in high school. You have friends. I mean, Anna Kendrick's hilarious in it. I think she's really just has like a couple good liners, but yeah, they really don't do much as personal characters.
If anything, the friends make Bella look like an awful friend. I always
Yeah.
thought like
Yeah.
Bella is such
Yeah.
a terrible friend. I would never want her
Yeah.
as a friend. You make stupid decisions, and also you're only about your boyfriend, and you don't care about any of us, and you never check in on any of us, and you don't even care about anything we say because all you're doing is thinking about your boyfriend.
Well, with that, why don't we move on to New Moon, the second movie in the franchise? So, here's something that I've noticed about New Moon. The plot structure of this movie is kind of oddly similar to the first one. After Edward leaves Bella, she starts spending more time with Jacob, and their relationship develops, and she starts to learn more about the wolf culture, very similar to how she learned about vampire culture when she was developing her relationship with Edward. And just like the first movie, the really big conflict of the plot doesn't really pick up until the third act, when Edward thinks that Bella dies, so he goes to Italy to meet with the Volturi and die, and then Bella and Alice have to go save him. The plot of this movie is oddly similar to the first one.
I don't know if I've ever noticed it, but I do agree with you. That's fully what happens.
Mm.
She's just mad depressed.
The seasons, they go
Yeah,
around her.
the
Yeah.
iconic shot.
It's an
Yeah.
iconic shot, but I literally hate this movie.
Really?
I hate the second one so much. If I could skip watching it every time we rewatch it, I would. I love Bella and Jacob stuff because it's just nice to see that connection.
Yeah.
But that's the most interesting part of the movie, though. Her and Jacob, and then when she goes to go save Edward, that's the most interesting parts.
All that stuff in Italy was infinitely more interesting than any of the stuff with Jacob.
Well, I did
Weird.
say
I
that at the
agree.
end. The Jacob and Bella stuff, and then when she goes to go save him, that's the most interesting part. But like you said, that's the whole end of the movie.
Yeah, just the third act.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
And by the way, here's something I find very interesting. When Edward tells Bella that he and his family are leaving Forks, he tells her that it's for her safety. So he brings her out into the woods where there have been known disappearances. He tells her this, and then he leaves her alone in the woods where there have been known disappearances.
He is
Kate, I
just
literally,
wow.
yeah, when I rewatched that, I was, oh, I understand why he might be hated like, a little bit, just like a little, but like it's whatever. He literally left her stranded.
I would love to know what the thought process was when creating that whole thing because it was just so silly. It really makes no sense. And also him leaving in general to keep her safe. It doesn't make sense. Like she's already at risk now because of you. You literally can't like ever go.
Fuck that guy. Fuck Edward. He's toxic.
All my homies hate Edward.
Okay. Jacob Stan. I'm a Jacob Stan.
Well, that leads me into the next thing I wanted to talk about. So, for the three of you personally, back then and even now, were you Team Edward or Team Jacob?
Back then
Edward.
I was Team Edward, and now I would not be with either of them.
I
Gross.
would be with Edward still.
I was Team Jacob.
Well, and in this movie, we obviously spend a lot more time with Jacob. So, just like Edward, his main character trait is that he loves Bella and he just longs for her. And just like Edward, he can be possessive. But what I've noticed in this movie and the other films is that he just comes off way more aggressive in his interactions with Bella. And for the most part, he just comes off as an obnoxious prick with little to no redeeming qualities. And it's a difficult character to root for.
Wow, that's interesting. I think that well, let me go off on a side tangent really quick. I think that his relationship to Bella is a little bit different than Edward's relationship to Bella because I think Jacob imprinting on Renesmee. I think that his attraction to Bella, him being so into her, it's involuntary. He literally can't help it. Do you know what I mean? So like him being aggressive and possessive or whatever, he can't help it because it's that dog in him.
It's the dog in him. Okay, all right.
He's also younger and he's obviously going through. I think the whole premise is, oh, he's turning into a werewolf and therefore he's more hot-headed and unable to control his emotions with how vampires are not able to control their bloodlust. He's not able to control his anger. And obviously he's like a new werewolf, so that's the whole thing. But you've got two male characters who I agree don't know boundaries and are aggressive and don't know how to communicate.
It's
Yeah,
like go to
actually,
therapy.
thinking about the movie scene, the movie theater scene with Jacob and how he's very touchy and he's kind of trying to, learn a boundary or two. Read the room.
Yeah, he forces a kiss multiple times.
Well, interestingly enough, Taylor Lautner was almost recast for this movie. You know, the studio was considering replacing him with a more imposing actor so that it would fit the character's transformation better. And Taylor really had to fight to keep the role, and he had to really go through excessive training to really get in shape. I'm curious how fans would have reacted to that recasting if it actually happened. It was only the second movie at that point. Maybe it wouldn't have been as bad, but again, there were also the books. So how do you guys think that recasting would have been?
Horrible.
I hate recasting.
Yeah.
I just really can't, especially when you're already deep into a series. I don't think it would have been the right move. And that's also why I don't really like the recasting of Victoria because I think the first actress had the look. And I think that it's obviously Bryce Dallas Howard. I mean, she's a great actress. I'm not denying that. She's amazing. But yeah, I kind of like seeing a person that is like a no name already in the role. So I think that's also why I had a problem with Victoria's recast.
It would have been an issue because the face on the ads, like
Yeah.
he was the brand. Like essentially like a third of this brand was his face. So if they recasted him, they would have not made the same amount of money.
But you know what's interesting about this movie? It has one of the most realistic scenes in any movie. And this is when we see Bella and Jacob take their bikes out and Bella crashes. And then, of course, the most logical thing that Jacob does in the situation is pop his shirt off and then use that to clean the bleeding wound on Bella's head. Because, of course he does that. I mean, who wouldn't do that in this situation? Man or woman, who wouldn't take their shirt off that they've been wearing all day and then use that to clean someone's bleeding wound? Who wouldn't do that, right?
That's what I'm saying. I mean, I'd be the first to, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of the times he just has his shirt off. You're literally in the middle of the road. You don't have your
Yeah.
shirt on. Yeah, they really just out it. They said put it in the script again and again and again.
He said, I'm gonna work to keep this role. And he said, I'm gonna show off the body I worked on.
I'm not going to say no to that. I'm going to say, yeah, it's not logical, but you can take off your shirt.
I watch that scene and I say, why the whole shirt? Why did we not rip part of the shirt off?
Once you be cold.
That reminds me of that spoof film, Vampires Suck.
Oh my God.
And I remember when Jacob's character took off his shirt, she asked him, "Why'd you take your shirt off?" "Oh, well, the contract says I have to do it every 10 minutes of screen time."
Literally.
And that was it.
Well, and let's talk about the ending of this movie. This movie ends with Edward proposing to Bella, and we hear her gasp, and then the movie cuts to black. So, first off, I'm generally not a big fan of cliffhangers, but what makes this less effective to me is that as audience members, don't we already kind of know that she's going to say yes at this point? Because we know that she's committed to becoming a vampire and spending eternity with Edward. So how is this even a question at this point if she's going to say yes or no?
We need to hear it. We just need to hear it, like confirmation. And it's also was like the cliffhanger.
But she does say no.
But we do know eventually she is going to say yes, though. Logically, from an audience perspective, we know that it's going to happen at some point.
Well, and it's so annoying too because this is what I want in order to marry you. And then she doesn't even get it like until after. Girl, you did not stick to your guns, you know?
No, yeah, there was like a lot of maybe coercion involved on both ends.
Yeah, a lot
They're
of
like, I
manipulation.
get what I want.
Yeah.
Well, moving on from New Moon now, let's talk about Eclipse. So here's something that I've noticed about this movie. I think of the first three in the saga, this one seems to have the most material when it comes to the plot. That being said, I think a lot of this plot feels very scattered because you have the continuing romance triangle between Bella, Edward, and Jacob. You have that trying to be developed, but you also have Victoria raising this new vampire army, and then we see the Cullen family forming this new alliance with the wolves to overthrow these vampires, and then you also have these new backstories, and we also get to learn more about wolf culture. More on this later, by the way. And we also have the characters graduating from high school. And most of these different plot threads don't really feel that connected. It seems that they're really trying to compete for attention.
That's fair. It's a lot more of like an information dump in this movie than in any of the other movies. And maybe higher stakes or something. It's definitely the most interesting one to me. I probably prefer this movie over most of the other films.
Yeah, I think this one is like an information dump, but it kind of sets us up for the excitement and action of the next two, because without kind of all the info and background behind this, then I don't think the next two would be as on edge of your seat, because now we kind of understand what's truly at fate per se.
Well, this is where I think this is really going to turn into a real debate. One of the biggest issues that I have with this movie and the entire saga is the triangle between Bella, Edward, and Jacob. Now, I know that this is the overarching plot within the saga. However, this movie, I think, focuses on it the most prominently. And here's part of the issue, though. Even if you go into this movie and this entire saga completely blind, as audience members, like I was mentioning earlier, I think that we already know, or at least have an idea, who Bella's going to end up with. I mean, it feels very clear from early on, especially in the second movie, that she's eventually going to end up with Edward, that she's not going to end up with Jacob. So you spend all this time trying to develop this triangle, but the thing is, we already know where it's going to end. So it doesn't feel that effective to me because we know that Jacob's not going to be who she ends up with. We know that she's going to become a vampire. We know she's going to end up with Edward and all that, even if you go in completely blind. I don't know. What is your relationship with the triangle between these three characters?
I'll say that having looked back at it as an adult, I don't see any chemistry between Jacob and Bella. I would say that there are nicely orchestrated moments of intimacy, but there is no chemistry. And so I never really believed that she was ever into him. And even when she had to act like, oh, what do I choose or how do I feel? I never felt there was a question in her mind. It was just, I should feel this way or I should try to feel this way. And so I'm just doing it for other people, not for me,
Yeah, it felt like a platonic brother-sister relationship.
which is terrible.
Yeah,
They
They
kid.
that's a
like
different can of worms.
I think they used the romance side as a scapegoat, or else it wouldn't be as interesting to incorporate the wolves per se if we didn't have something to connect ourselves emotionally with per se. We like the underdog more, so we kind of want to follow him as well. But the way they like wrote him in the script, they make him seem yeah, an asshole, and you're like, well, I want to vote for you, but you're kind of weird.
I'm curious about what their relationship and dynamic is in the books. I never read the books, but I'm curious if it really is more of a love triangle and it's just not
Mm.
portrayed well on screen or something.
Well, and this movie is also where we start getting little glimpses into the lives of some of the other Cullen family members, those members being Jasper and Rosalie. And we get to see their backstories and what led to them becoming vampires. And honestly, I don't know about you guys, but Rosalie's whole story, becoming a vampire and hunting down the people who assaulted her, and also you have Jasper's whole story where he was turned by that vampire Maria. I think those sound like more interesting movies.
I
I
agree.
Yeah,
literally
I
was going to
agree.
say that Rosalie's acting was phenomenal when she was recounting her story. I was, whoa, I really
Mhm.
like actually believed her. And then Jasper's as well. 100% I think they should do a spinoff.
If you guys knew Alice's backstory too, that's also a really interesting story.
But unfortunately, we don't get much of this with most of the other characters. Apart from Carlisle, most of the other Cullens don't get the best exploration or characterization. Alice is obviously the quirky one, and she's able to see the future and everything. Emmett is mainly just the muscle of the group. And Esme, kind of like some of the other characters, she's kind of just there. She's just the mama bear of the family, and that's pretty much it. Most of the Cullens don't get the best characterization, so you can't really get too attached to them as characters.
I agree. I don't really care about Esme or Emmett that much. Even Jasper, it's an interesting arc, but I don't really care for him. I mostly just care for Alice and Edward. And honestly, Rosalie, I just always thought she was interesting and she was so pretty. And she was a bitch, and I loved it.
But I do love that Alice is probably one of my favorites out of the Collins. But yeah, we don't see her backstory at all. It's just her character development, the little that she has in the film.
Well, here's another thing. In this movie, we find out that the werewolves that we've been following aren't really werewolves. Instead, we find out from Jacob's dad, Billy, that they're actually shapeshifters who can transform into giant wolves. So here's my question. Why? Just like with vampires, what's the point? Why can't vampires and werewolves just be vampires and werewolves? I've never understood this direction.
Feel like she just wanted to be different. She wanted to stand out in some way, but no one will ever be, oh, Jacob's not a werewolf. He's a shapeshifter who can turn into a wolf. Babe, you're a werewolf. Why is she trying so hard to be different? And in a bad way, too. It's not even parts that make sense to throw away things.
If they were just werewolves, they wouldn't be as relatable. And then we would be scared of them. And then there'd be a whole different scenario. So I think they were going for werewolves that were relatable, which is a whole different topic that they decided to take on instead of the scary werewolves. So I think that's why.
Well, in talking about the climax of this movie, is it me or was it incredibly easy for the characters to kill Victoria? I mean, Victoria and Riley find Edward and Bella. Seth takes out Riley. Edward has a brief scuffle with Victoria and then pops her head off. And after these three movies spent all this time building Victoria up as this big threat for the characters, and then we eventually see them face off, she just kind of gets taken out way too easily, in my opinion. I think the fight between her and Edward should have been a lot longer and a little bit meaner. I think that would have been more satisfying. It was just too rushed, in my opinion, and the fight itself felt really underwhelming.
Every film of this series, that exactly happens every single time. They're really never facing much danger.
Yeah.
Every time there's a fight, it's either over quickly or it doesn't really happen.
So maybe the most important part that they were trying to get across was just keeping Bella safe. Fuck everyone else. This conflict doesn't actually have to be that bad. We just got to keep our girl safe. That's what we're rooting for. So yeah, they literally didn't spend any time on the conflict. It could have been more on the edge of your seat for like 20 minutes, but it was what, an 8 minute, 10 minute battle?
But also, of course, he's gonna be the one to save her because he's the reason she's in this in the first place. Girl, are we not seeing the pattern here?
Well, now moving on to the last two movies in the franchise. We have Breaking Dawn Part 1 and Breaking Dawn Part 2. The fourth movie, Part 1, in my opinion, has the same issue that the first two films had. That issue being that there isn't really a whole lot here when it comes to story. We have the first 30-ish minutes of the movie devoted to this wedding, and then we have them on their honeymoon, once again, just hanging out, not really doing much. And then the actual conflict of the movie is when Bella ends up getting pregnant, 50 minutes into the runtime, and then the rest of the movie is them waiting for her to deliver this baby, or if it's going to kill her. We have the wolves monitoring them. And again, it's mainly just the characters waiting around for something to happen. Once again, they're not really trying to reach something, they're just waiting for it to actually come to them. That's my whole issue with the structure of this first movie.
The only part I like about this movie is the wedding and the honeymoon, and that's it.
I love this whole movie. The music is so good. The editing is fun. They just make it, we're on a honeymoon. They just make it fun.
Well, Cassidy, why do you love this movie so much?
Because Bella almost dies and I love Bella so much. And that would be really awful. Because we just had the best moment ever. They got married, they went on their honeymoon. We're living it up. We're on cloud nine. And then all of a sudden we're just ransacked with a demon child. That's whoa. And then after that, you're playing doctor. How do we figure out how to save her? And it's just more about saving Bella. It just continues the plot. And then she almost dies. And then she does die actually, which is crazy because then she comes back to like just so many things happen.
I would love to know how they had a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't Edward dead?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, here's the other thing. When it comes to Renesmee, as a baby, have you guys ever noticed how odd the CGI baby looks?
So bad. It is
Awful.
so
I noticed it when I was like
unbearable.
12.
Originally, it was going to be an animatronic, but they couldn't get it to look right, so they had to CGI the face and everything.
And it still looked freaking
And it's
weird.
terrible.
And also, they wanted it to look like it was growing quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah. But it was so bad. It was so bad.
really bad.
And we need to talk about Jacob imprinting on Renesmee. I have never understood this creative decision. I already didn't like Jacob's character to begin with, but this just made it even worse. I mean, you spend all this time with Jacob, seeing how much he loves Bella, he just longs for her, only to have him imprint on her daughter in the end. So the thing for me is, I would much rather prefer that he just stayed miserable the rest of his life instead of imprinting on Renesmee.
Yeah, no, it's again back to what I said in the very beginning. You just can't read too much into things. You have to take it with a grain of salt. You just have to accept that that's what's happening because when you really think about it logistically, and it's icky. It's weird.
I wonder if everyone would feel differently about it if they had met when she was technically the same age as him. Even though she had
Yeah.
just been born recently, if she looked like she was his age, would it be different? Because technically, she obviously stays young for a very long time, but she'll probably be older than him before him.
Yeah, because the relationship between Sam and his wife and then Leah, who he imprinted on.
Well, so Sam imprinted on Emily, I think is her name, but Leah and Sam were dating, and then Sam and Leah broke up because Sam imprinted on Emily.
Well, and also, here's something that's always annoyed me about both parts. When we see their cousin Irina show up at the wedding, she then storms off because she's furious to see Seth there because the wolves killed Laurent, who she was involved with previously. Here's my problem with this, though. This was never mentioned or shown at any point in the previous movies. We just find out in this movie right here, part one specifically, that she had something going on with Ron at one point, and we just get a little glimpse of him from the second movie. This was never talked about, never explored at any point, and it just feels so random. It's just always been an issue for me.
The screenwriters were probably like, oh shoot, we forgot to connect those two together at the previous movie. We got to figure it out. And then did a little manipulating the script. Yeah, because it would have been in there if it wasn't a forgotten piece of information because it was so random.
I think it's just interesting too when you really think about it because when I watch this movie and that whole discussion happens of her being involved with Laurent previously, I don't even connect it. Also, we're just saying that this happened and she's just upset about it. And like you said, we've never heard anything about it before. Honestly, when that happens, I forget that that's who they're talking about.
Also, it makes her motivation against Bella less effective in part two.
So true.
Part one also ends on a cliffhanger when we see Bella wake up as a vampire. Here's my question. When it comes to the cliffhanger in this movie when compared to New Moon, which cliffhanger do you like better?
I like the when the eyes open up.
Breaking Down part one's better?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's more iconic.
Because you're anticipating seeing her as a vampire. All you get are
Yeah.
her eyes, and now you have to wait so long to see the next movie.
We've kind of been waiting for this over the course of 4 movies.
I think it was a whole year that people had to wait to see part two or something.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
that ending is crazy to wait that long.
I remember watching that in the theater. I remember sitting there and
You're like,
oh my
whoa.
God, yeah.
I definitely saw them all in theater, so I agree.
Well, in part two is mainly about the Cullens uniting other vampires from across the world to help fight the Volturi. And with some of the vampires, we see how they have their own unique abilities, similar to how Edward can read minds and Alice can see the future, and how Bella is a shield. And when we see the new vampires, we have Benjamin who can control the elements. There's Safrina who can create illusions, and Kate has those electric powers. And some of the Volturi members, there's Jane's power to inflict pain on others, and you have her brother Alex powers, those dark mist powers. So here's the thing. At this point, the movie just kind of starts turning into an X-Men film.
No, it's so true.
I will say it's also interesting how in these films it's supernatural against supernatural. It's never the humans are a threat.
Well, and here's the other thing. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about how it's hard to get attached to characters. So we have all these new vampires come in, all these brand new vampires, and I think too many are introduced, and we don't really spend enough time with these new characters for us to end up rooting for them, in my opinion. Again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Most of the side characters in this franchise don't get the best material, so it's really difficult to get attached to any of them.
I'd agree. I don't feel attached to any of them except for maybe ones that are in couples or the sisters. I feel more for instead of just random people. Okay.
Or even Rami Malek's character, Benjamin. I really like Rami Malek as an actor, but I don't even know his character.
Yeah, I think it was less about knowing the characters and more so just showing the scope of the universe being created.
Well, and let's talk about the climax of this movie. We see both groups show up for the battle. They converse, then Alice and Jasper arrive. Alice shows Arrow a vision, which leads to the big fight between these characters. And after that intense battle, we then find out that the entire thing was just one of Alice's visions. So you have this massive battle where main characters are all dying together, protagonists and antagonists. This is just my 2 cents, but that's pretty awesome. But then you find out that none of it was really real. And it just came off as such a slap in the face. And then for the Volturi to just leave at the end felt so unsatisfying, and also it felt very incomplete too. You're telling me after everything that these characters went through, that's how everything gets resolved?
That's why I said every end to these films is so anticlimactic because nothing really happens or it's over really fast.
No, I totally agree with you. I do actually really like when people are killed off. It has to be in the right way and do the character justice. But I don't know. I just think that this is such an iconic scene. I think it's more nostalgic for me because I remember being in the theater watching this, just the energy of the theater and then watching this crazy plot twist happen. So, yeah, I mean, it would have been interesting if some people had died, but I just think of this as a nostalgic scene for me.
I think they did think a little bit. They did use their noggins a bit because they used her power the entire time, but not to the extent of what this scene was. And so I think watching it as someone seeing it for the first time, whoa, that now I understand the point of her vision.
The first time and you had no idea that that happened, it's crazy. But if you know that this is something that happens every time you see it, you're just gonna, this is just a waste of my time.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've gone through every movie in the saga, let's get back to what we were talking about at the beginning. So, despite all our issues with these movies, is the Twilight Saga worth watching? I mean, like I was talking about at the beginning, it can be a guilty pleasure. I can see people getting that level of enjoyment, and I can understand why it means so much for a lot of people. But in terms of being a guilty pleasure, I get very little pleasure from these movies, but that's just me. But what about you guys? Are they worth watching?
Oh
I
yeah.
think they're worth watching. Like, you don't have to love them, but I think it's worth giving them a good watch, for the culture.
Yeah, to be into the culture, the pop culture, to know what all the references is. Because in the end, these movies are going to have an impact on other things in the future. Even if people don't like them, something years from now is going to be, made from this movie.
And just like Harry Potter, they're probably going to be readapted at some point.
100%.
Hope not.
Honestly, I just love if it's bad, I love seeing a dumpster fire.
Yeah, it's true. That's true.
At least we'll always have the originals, and we'll always have the original Twilight, guys.
Mhm.
All right, guys, I think that wraps up this discussion. Hunter, Felicity, Cassidy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so
Thank
much
you
for
for
Thanks
having
having
for
us.
us.
having us.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you all again next time.